According to psychology, dreams are the product of what is referred to as daily residue, among other things, which are essentially fragments of data related to our experiences within this physical reality. It is my belief that the mind is what connects the body and spirit, and that while dreams are the average person processing information related to their interactions and experiences each day, that they also serve other purposes beyond just the mundane. Follow me down the rabbit hole for a moment. If the entire point of having a physical body were to be having experiences in which we could learn from, and that information is integrated at a cellular level, what if the mind were just as capable of receiving information from the spirit as it is in sending it, which could relate to downloading and uploading information to a cloud, or as I like to call it, our consciousness. I have been a lucid dreamer going back as far as I could remember, starting at only maybe 3 years old. I'm still not sure if it's stranger or more strange that I remember my dreams going back that far, or the nature of them, and the fact that I often know at the time that I'm dreaming. It doesn't happen every time. Sometimes I've even thought I was awake and turned out to be dreaming. So at least some things go both ways. But I can and do at times know that I am dreaming, and often even change the course of my dreams on these occasions. It wasn't until I started meditation, though, that I realized I didn't see mental imagery at will, since it always just kind of flowed in when I really needed it to. Turns out, that's a different part of the brain. Until that time, I'd always used the word imagine, or associated the concept of visualizing with the act of relating to a person, place, or thing with the ideas, words, and feelings that one would associate with them. So I wasn't actually imagining them. I just would think of them, I guess you would say. Never actually occurred to me, though, that I wasn't visualizing them. Turns out that this is a condition known as aphantasia, which I've discussed before. And that vibrant and lucid imagery I do see in my dreams and in other states of consciousness or trance are coming from a different part of my brain that is used to consciously see imagery when one so chooses. I can't use that part that does it consciously, but it happens automatically with the unconscious part. Basically, I'm unconsciously seeing imagery in my mind, just not at will, which I still don't quite fully understand, but I will. That discovery, though, explained a lot about why it was so difficult for me to draw, paint, remember people's faces, things like that. I'd always tested low on spatial awareness portions of testings throughout school, which would have been nice to know back then. Too bad that discovery wouldn't have been made until well after I finished going to school. Learning about that, though, was an incredible feeling. Not only did it explain so many things, but yet again, it felt as though I found another missing piece of a puzzle for myself that I hadn't even realized was missing until starting on my spiritual journey. Meditation and trance have since become fixtures in my everyday life as I seek to understand more about myself and to help others in doing the same. Welcome back to another episode of Going 5D with Destiny Dawn. I'm your host, Destiny Dawn. As discussed in previous episodes, I was able to heal and learn so many aspects about myself. Combined with what I knew and had learned from both a psychological and spiritual standpoint, it is my belief that one of the biggest issues we face these days is how many people are suffering from physical, mental, emotional, and even cellular trauma that many have brought in from different lifetimes. or so I believe. Throughout this series, we have talked about a number of different methods an individual can use to process and heal our inner wounds. But as many of you probably know, while a walk, deep breathing, and meditation can and do usually help with daily stress, sometimes it can be too difficult for some to work through these issues on their own. For that reason, I will be focusing part of today's discussion less on the meditation act itself. I know, crazy, because y'all have heard me talk about it so much. It's pretty obvious how helpful it could be. But that said, I also know how much confronting misery, pain, and suffering can be. So in light of that, I want to discuss other methods of healing as it relates to trance therapy. We aren't stopping there though, oh no. We will also be covering other areas of trance that can help us in addressing more of that deep-seated pain and trauma. Also with healing and learning, how to rewire our brains, how we think and perform tasks through a concept known as neuroplasticity. And then to finish off, we'll be talking about some of my dreams and visualizations and a few takeaways that I have from those. To start, think of your body as a walking, talking, fully immersive and interactive biological computer, and your brain as the hard drive, containing over 88 billion neurons using over 7,000 neurons that send up to 100 signals a second. This vast storage and retrieval center is, of course, light years ahead of even the most sophisticated piece of computing technology available at this time. So it obviously works far more efficiently, but for all intents and purposes, how they work is similar in the sense that both use a system of storage and retrieval that is actually somewhat similar. Unlike long-term information that is stored in a human's hippocampus and amygdala, a hard drive randomly assigns certain areas and retrieves it using specific prompts and keywords that tell the computer where to look for that information. The human brain, which works similarly but different, continuously reshapes itself with each new piece of information and memories associated with it as it is being stored. Layer by layer, new neurons and synaptic pathways are formed throughout our entire lives with each new experience or memory. The more we reference back to or retrieve that information, the better formed the neural pathways become in getting back to it. This is a process known as ingraining. The more we ingrain the information, the easier and better our access to it becomes. It is for that reason that we are able to easily read and do math, things like that that we were taught when we were young and frequently do. Over time, it's pretty common for people to get rusty, though, if they don't continue using that information and trying to remember things like if I becomes before E or C or V or whatever. It's like everything else. If we don't use it, we will lose it. Or rather, you'll have a more difficult time recalling it anyway, at least as clearly as you did when you first learned it. Sometimes, in a lot of cases, you'll have to relearn it altogether because there's so many pieces missing. But that's where the old adage comes in. It's just like riding a bike. Since relearning skills are much easier the second time around because of ingraining. Understanding memory and processes help make it easier to understand the importance of trance. That's why I talk about this. Since accessing memories in this state can have a profound effect on what you can do with previously stored information. And sometimes it's just not easy to get there. Sometimes we got to do it when we're in a very relaxed but conscious state. Memories made while in a heightened state of panic, anxiety, pain, or trauma are a different beast. They are handled completely different by the brain, since in these types of scenarios, our brains are usually being operated, at least to some capacity, by our executive functioning, usually triggered by our fight or flight response, an internal mechanism that takes over when the body senses it needs to reroute energy and resources for the purposes of survival. Stressful situations can trigger this, like I said, fight or flight, which is why so many of us suffer from the effects of cortisol overproduction. But that's a different podcast. In the event of extreme trauma, panic, fear, pain, and anxiety, the brain can and will store the memory in a way that does not allow for easy access or recall. You can't just use words or memories or something similar to access it like normal, until it believes that you are ready and prepared to retrieve it. This is why some people cannot remember without the help of intensive therapy, especially traumatic events. That's why I want to mention that here. It's necessary for some people. So what we will be discussing next should not take the place of appropriate medical care or that of a trained professional. I cannot stress that enough. While I can and do recommend going back and healing old wounds when we can, situations like sexual abuse or abuse of any kind for that matter should be done with the help of a professional. I understand in saying that there are some cases that you do just want to do by yourself. I get that. That said, I will continue on. Assuming that we are referring to, in today's discussion, unpleasant memories that we are aware of and that we simply want to address on our own. There are ways that we can access this information in the privacy and comfort of our own home. In doing so, we can heal our own wounds and replace painful information, leaving something better in its place. There are ways. As a child, I was bullied and treated badly for looking and acting different. So I understand the need to go back and offer reassurance and love to that young and helpless child in order to empower them so that they can see everything going forward from that point on a little differently. Some people have wise parents, grandparents, or mentors that can help them through those types of situations. Some don't. And while I know I did have people who loved me, most of them could not understand what it was like to be disabled and appear ugly, weak, or weird. Especially back in the 80s. People were mean. That's where I was growing up. So I did not blame anyone and use this as an example because I did not even realize that these memories still haunted me until I began meditation and shadow work. Since then, they kept resurfacing. Anytime I would go into these deeper levels of meditation, shit was popping up everywhere. This is just one of many examples of how sophisticated and amazing our minds and bodies truly are. In cases such as these, where I thought I had overcome all of that by just not letting it get to me too much. And to a certain degree, I think I did. But what my psyche knew that I did not was that the pain and isolation I felt back then changed me. It affected me deeply, but going back to that point in time not only allowed me to process and make peace with some of the moments, but it changed many things that I had thought of or had previously been affected by as a result of that pain back then. So let's call an example like that level 1. In that I remembered it, but it needed to be addressed in order to put it back into perspective. Was easy for me to get to, wasn't actually giving me anxiety in the present. That's level 1. Level 2, I would consider to be things that give us anxiety or result in resistance, tensity, or hesitation when we think about them, or when we are otherwise brought into our awareness. They essentially make us feel uncomfortable. I believe past trauma resurfaces in small bits when our brains are close to ready for us to face them. if you feel like that's happening, if things that make you uncomfortable, but your gut is telling you it's time and you will know. If that's happening, I encourage you to proceed with caution. This is probably a good example of something you can do in a trance or meditative state in order to work through those issues once and for all. And if that's the case and you feel like you can, go for it. Level 3 will be obvious because either you will not know why something upsets you a great deal, because that's the giveaway, is that something upsets you a great deal and you can't figure out why. Or if you do know but can't fathom bringing it in full view into your awareness, I encourage you to seek professional help. Especially if you are repeatedly having something like this brought into your awareness, the fact that it's something bothers you in this case, or something you are aware of that did happen and it keeps being brought back up into your mind, but you don't want to face it. You don't want to work through those wounds. In that case, your brain may be trying to tell you that it's close and wants you to address something from your past or to find someone to help you do it. Obviously, these are cases I highly recommend seeking guidance from a trained professional for. Now that we've gotten those examples out of the way, and trust me when I say there are many more, we will talk next about techniques that you can use to reach a level of trance when you can comfortably work through mild to moderate trauma in order to resolve it on your terms. My hope is not to take away from those medical professionals, by the way. I understand that not everyone has access to that, and even those who do think that some issues are too insignificant or private or not worth the time and effort to seek out professionals. But please, please, please just do not use this information in place of seeking medical attention. Not only is it okay to talk to someone, but you are 100% worth the effort. This is meant to be complementary, meaning that my hope is that you are already working with a professional or have on the really hard stuff, and that's not what we're talking about here. If it has been referred, recommended, or prescribed. That said, if you are already interested or using a medication as a daily practice and are finding certain thoughts or memories keep popping up, you are who I'm talking to. Same with those who have aha moments, like I've talked about a few times. Like when something changed your way of thinking and you need to go back and see some things from a fresh new perspective, or you just want to explore what may need some attention from your past. I myself have had some of those aha moments, which I've jokingly referred to as elfo moments, for those of you who know who that is and why it's funny. For those of you who don't, it basically refers to moments like I was talking about. Something brought into my awareness from the past that I suddenly see very differently where I'm experiencing that now. Like you suddenly have a realization or an epiphany related to an old memory and you're like, oh. Why would we want to go back to that point in time? Because everything past that point, seen through different eyes and understanding of the world, at that point in time, can change how we think. While our ways of thinking and memories associated with specific events can be updated in instances where new information becomes available, not everything does, especially the really painful stuff. At least, not if we don't go back and step into those shoes once again. To update that perspective with relevant new information, you would be amazed at how profound an impact doing that can have. Many people, myself included, have seen great success from doing this kind of inner work on their own. But what if it doesn't work? What if you've tried therapy, maybe even medication, and you still have some pain or questions about your past that you alone cannot seem to resolve or find the answers to? This is where psychedelic therapy has come in for a lot of people, and that's one thing I'm touching on today. It has come in and saved the day. Again, not a doctor. but it has been known to effectively assist patients, particularly veterans with previously incurable forms of post-traumatic stress disorder, in treating severe anxiety and depression symptoms. There are a number of sources available where you can find someone to assist you with those services too. But since it's still not legal in states or at a federal level, in some states, I should say, or at a federal level, we won't go too far into that. But this isn't going to be the only episode about alternative states of consciousness. Bet. This is one of my favorite subjects, so we will definitely be revisiting this again. But to summarize, a lot of what I feel like, what I want to drive home is that meditation can really help when you get into those deeper levels of consciousness. When you start getting into that trance-like state, and you will if you practice meditation enough. It's not a matter of if you can. It's a matter of will. You just have to do it. Now, I feel like I set up the stage pretty well enough to address a couple of the most common questions that I run into as it relates to dreaming and trance, or altered states of consciousness. As I alluded to earlier, I believe that the unconscious door swings both ways, in that we are constantly downloading information from our experiences, from the data we pick up, processed through our mind and downloaded into both memories as well as our spirit at times. Not everything, but the really important stuff. Conversely, I believe that we receive messages in the form of symbols from our spirit, our unconsciousness, with regards to events from our past that need to be processed in a different way, or even to prepare us for those yet to come. It's funny to me how many people say that they don't believe in spiritual or woo-woo stuff, but are okay with talking about the paranormal experiences that they've had. Many of whom have told me stories about, or premonitions, I should say, that they had in the form of dreams. I'm not even kidding you. I alone have talked to dozens of people that have had at least one prophetic experience that they shared with me, usually in relation to paranormal stuff that we were talking about. And that's not even me trying. I'm fully expecting to hear more and more of these too going forward as people start to become more comfortable with having these conversations. Because the older I've gotten, the more that I have, and the more people have revealed as time's gone on. I mean, I can only imagine how many people really did have them and just didn't feel comfortable enough at the time to tell me. Can you imagine? As fascinating as symbology is to me, I believe that this is at least to some degree unique to each person. And that's one of the common themes that I see in a lot of these symbology. Well, I don't know what this meant. Or I figured out what that meant later because it was prophetic. That said, there are common themes that I would like to explore with you as it relates to symbology today. The most common of which is death. Depending on how it is presented, I believe it can and often does prepare us for impending loss or rebirth. And by rebirth, I mean a huge change in our life, like a catalytic change. It's almost never a direct revelation, though, and that's what I want to drive home on that it has almost nothing to do with actual people dying. Usually that of a friend or family member having something happen to them. Now, I have had prophetic dreams about people dying that did die, but only one of them. And it didn't tell me that they were dying. They were just in distress. Maybe that's the best way to talk about some of this symbology, is just to give you some of the examples that I have. So I guess we'll just jump to that. And we'll talk more about other prophetic stuff a little later. When I was 15, I dreamt that I was walking down a local road near my house, and that a car whizzed by me, and I remember being able to feel the wind. Like, I knew it was going really fast. It blew by me, and then it crashed. It went off into the ditch, and I remember it looked bad, and I ran towards it. It was almost instantly engulfed in flames, though. So I tried to help who I could, and I walked around to see if I could see anyone. At first, I couldn't see anyone, but then I came around to the other side, and I saw the driver. The window was open. It was only his window that was open, and it was only open enough for me to see him. So we kicked out the rest of the window, or I kicked out the rest of the window. I remember he was conscious in that dream, and he like helped me. I kicked it though, and he like pushed out the glass, and I helped drag him out. By the time that we got far enough away, the vehicle exploded, and I watched as horror as it burned right before my eyes in my dream. Pretty intense for a dream, right? That's the kind of shit I'm talking about. Told you guys about some of my dreams. Kind of fucked up at times. What's really fucked up though is a week later, a cousin of mine died in a car accident, not dissimilar from this one. And the only survivor was the driver. I never met him, but sure felt like I did. When I was 16, I saw one of my best friend's babies in my dream. Saw his red hair. Saw him in utero. Never met him before either, but I also felt like he was in distress. I don't know how. It just felt like he couldn't breathe or something. Something was wrong. She gave birth about a week or so later, and the baby was stillborn. I remember trying to call her and say something was wrong. I did call her. I told her something was wrong. Something didn't feel right, and she should go to the doctor. I think she did, but he still didn't make it. At 18, I stayed the night with one of my cousins and his girlfriend, who was pregnant at the time. And that night, I had another dream. But this time, I dreamt of a beautiful, black-haired, healthy baby girl. Several months later, they did give birth to a very healthy, beautiful, black-haired baby girl. At 20, after growing up, hearing a lot of my doctors tell me that because of my growth hormone deficiency, it was going to be pretty much impossible for me to ever conceive or carry to term, even if I did. Despite this, I had a conversation with myself as I drifted off to sleep one night. I don't know who I was talking to, but I remember I was begging for at least just one child because I wanted to experience motherhood for myself. Somehow, in that moment, it was almost like I felt like someone had heard me and said yes, or let me know that it was going to happen, because I just knew. And I don't know who I was making my case to or why, but just remember laying there thinking about that. I can't tell you how I knew, but I did dream about it that night. I dreamt of being pregnant, and I just felt like I knew after that point. And it was just the strangest night. And it did. Almost a year later, I was induced because my lack of hormones prevented me from going into labor. Ultimately, I had to have an emergency cesarean, but I did have a 9-pound, beautiful baby girl. She was at least 2 weeks late because I couldn't go into labor, despite dying or almost dying multiple times in the process. We both had to stay in the hospital afterwards, me for 4 days, her for 8. And I remember when she was born, first it was 6 months, they said. She had breathed in meconium. It had popped my water the night before I went into labor, trying to get me to go into labor, but I couldn't. And she sat there for over 12 hours and breathed in meconium. But we survived. I couldn't make much milk, so breastfeeding didn't last very long, but I did that too. So I did get to experience pregnancy and childbirth, just like I asked for, and I knew that I would because of that dream. I've also dreamt about facing off with Freddy Krueger years after seeing the movies. But symbology like this, to me, is a perfect example of how we use things that are familiar to us to represent things that scare us now. In those times, one in particular that I had, that I'm thinking of, not long after going into my spiritual journey, I believe that symbology representing facing off with aspects from my past that I still feared, to let me know that it was time to stop hiding from them. That if I could do it with Freddy Krueger, which I had several times by that point, I could do it with anything. Did you know that symbology isn't usually the same in America as it is in China or Africa? While some elements and their meanings are the same, the images in symbology do tend to differ. I believe that this is because the experiences and daily residue is so different. The images contained within our memories shape who and what we see in our dreams, as well as the settings themselves. Another example I once saw a house in my dream that I would recognize years later. While I did not remember ever seeing that house, certainly not at the time, I was a little kid, I never assumed it was prophetic or even meaningful for that exact reason. I did see it in other dreams, though. It was often used as a setting, a place that I would have these dreams, a house that I would be in these dreams. In all likelihood, I very well may have seen it and thought that it served as the perfect backdrop for whatever dream I was having. That said, I've also dreamt about living in a much bigger house with Victorian windows, for example. I'm thinking of one in particular now, surrounded by ornately carved stairs and balconies that I often saw myself walking and lounging on in my dreams. One day, I saw myself entertaining guests in my favorite section of the house. It was where I always entertained guests. It was this room filled with this beautiful stained glass window, which it was almost like a cathedral. I don't know, I called it something in the dream. This was a specific room, and it opened up to this gorgeous balcony that overlooked my beloved gardens. While drinking tea and chatting, the light in the room started to flicker one day and then fade into a dreary color, and that's what first caught my attention. I continued on talking and enjoying my favorite space. Blips of another reality kept coming into view. It was like something from The Matrix, where I was sitting in the same room and in the same place, but suddenly I would see the paint look dirty and worn and chipped. The house appeared broken, especially my beloved stained glass, with shards missing in a bunch of areas. I remember looking up and feeling so sad. I remember ignoring it the first time, thinking it was just my imagination, but despite my best efforts, it kept happening. The more that I would ignore it, the more it would happen. One of the several guests that I had been entertaining noticed it as well. Only one noticed it. The others disappeared after noticing it a few times. And then it was just the two of us. Of course, I didn't write down the dream, so I can't remember who the other person was, or even if I knew at the time. Maybe it was a spouse or a family member, but I just remember us discussing it and coming to a realization that we had been there for too long and that it was time to go. It almost felt as though I had loved that house so much that I struggled in death to part with it, until something made me realize that, when it all came crumbling down around me and I was no longer in the beautiful home that I once delighted in sharing with others. I don't know what to think of that one. Or the vision I once had when asking my guides in a meditation about connecting me to Lemuria or Mu, what my connection was to it, since it's always fascinated me. But in that vision, I saw myself walking up a beautiful staircase built inside the top of a mountain. It was more like the staircase went around the mountain, but there was this one part where it led to that was at the top, and it led up to this structure that was built into the mountain. It felt so exciting to see the others that were walking alongside me, as if we were all so happy to see each other, to be gathering once again. We were genuinely excited. I don't remember ever feeling that excited to see people. But I was, knowing that they were all coming to see me, some kind of artwork or something I had done. I just knew that they were coming to see me, and I inquired about what they were working on to convey my interest in intending theirs as well. I don't know what that was, but upon entering this structure within the mountain, all I could think about was how beautiful the walls were. Like, at one minute I'm talking to these people and I'm following them in and I'm so excited. And the next thing I know, I get inside and all I can do is look at the walls, because they're just so fascinating to look at. I remember the very first thing I noticed was that the walls were like glimmering. They were like lighting up, and I was just so intrigued. I had to go look at the walls. I remember starting from the left and making my way around to where I was headed once again, the opposite wall of the door I'd walked in. Where the door stood that I'd intended to go through upon entering the room. But it took what felt like several minutes to make my way around, because I was just dragging my hands across the surface of the walls. And I can tell you exactly what they felt like. They felt like rock, like stone, but with like liquid and then hardened again crystal inside of them, which was where the color was coming from. I can tell you what it felt like under my hand. It was smooth. The crystal was smooth, and it would light up with different colors. It was crazy. It was like embedded into the stone walls, lining the entire room on both sides of the double doors, which led into an amphitheater in the next room. And I was really excited about going there, but I was so distracted by these walls. After finally making my way through the door, I was yet again in awe of what I would see next, which were more walls being lit up by these crystal lights, which I realized then seemed to respond to sound. As the room started to quiet down, I remember rushing down this big staircase onto this like center stage area, where I hurried to take my place on stage. And I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of, probably 40 others who all sang with me. I was singing. I was going up to a stage to sing in an amphitheater where I was surrounded by people. It was the most incredible feeling. And as we began, I looked up to see this like crystal structure at the top. And the whole place just lit up, especially when we would reach these certain like high notes. It was just the most beautiful thing that I have ever seen. And yet I cannot for the life of me see it again in my waking mind, as much as I wish I could. I remember it. I can tell you every little detail. I can tell you how it felt and why and when and how, but I can't see it. It's so frustrating. I have seen it a couple of times since then in hypnotherapy, and one time in deep meditation, deep trance. Wherever this place is or was, it was so beautiful that I actually started crying. And it still makes me emotional every time I think about it. Probably really loud right now. But it was just so amazing. I know I've been there, and I hope that I will see it again, but I can't explain to you why it is or what would make me so emotional, but it is very real, that I know. And I am absolutely fascinated by what we can experience in dreams and altered states of consciousness, partly because of that. Who controls them? Who decides what we see and how we see it? How much control do we really have? And is it possible for us to bring forth experiences and information that we have collected in other lifetimes? Can we at least share it? Or are we already uploading this data to the collective consciousness? Or do we do that upon return to the 6th or 7th dimension after we leave our physical bodies? Or are we bringing it there while we're still alive? I've also heard of shared dreams and visions, journeys. I actually take part in journey sessions now and integration therapy from journeys that I and other people have had. It's incredible. There's still so many questions I have left, though, unanswered, that I do intend to find out, which is why I do have every intention of exploring this further with you in future episodes. But this is where I'm going to have to leave you today, or pretty close. For now, if you're experiencing strange dreams, I would highly suggest keeping a sleep journal. I know everyone says that, and if you're anything like me, you're terrible at doing that. But here's one thing that I tried that does work. Just send a text to yourself. You're still laying there, you're still half out of it. Maybe you've gotten up and you're sitting on the toilet, whatever. I try to do it as close to having woke up as I possibly can. So usually I'm still just laying there. If it's a particularly strange or long one, that I continue having elements come through for a while though. For anywhere from several minutes up to an hour after waking, I would say. And that if I want to pick up from where I left off, like say I had a dream and I somehow got woke up by some external sound or whatever, that there is a small chance I can go back into it and pick up where I left off. A small chance of doing so if I lay back down and go back to sleep and just focus my thoughts on what I can remember last so I can pick up from where I left off. Again, unfortunately, that doesn't work every time. But the same goes for if I'm thinking about something in particular as I drift off to sleep. If there's something I want to know, learn, or dream about when I'm going to sleep, that works usually pretty well. And I actually saw a study. I can't remember, this just popped into my head, but I can't remember where it was from. But I have seen these studies that were done. And it's a pretty well-known fact now anyway, where when you go to sleep thinking about a problem you need to solve, not stressing about it, that's a different thing. That's going to keep you from going to sleep. But if you think about something that you want to solve, your brain will work on it while you're sleeping. And that goes back to that executive functioning again that takes over during those fight or flight stages or instances. Your brain will continue working on things for you in a more relaxed state where you can think clearly. Because if you're stressed out about something, you can't think clearly. That's why this is so important to do. Whether it's stress, trauma, problem solving, whatever the case may be, thinking about these things in that altered state of consciousness is the entire point to what we're talking about today. So if you think about some of those things or what you want to dream about as you're going to sleep, that's the direction that your mind's going to go. People often talk about what you can do to help remember or understand your dreams too. Common answers are things like keeping a sleep journal, considering what symbols might mean to you. If you have no clue, I would recommend Googling that shit. And if dreams that you've had still don't make any sense, sit with it in meditation. But give your mind enough time to relax before you really start trying to think about it. And then write down the first thing or things that come to your mind. Whatever you do, don't take it too seriously. I do not believe that that is the intended purpose behind dreams or visions. They are rarely ever to protect you or someone else from harm. That will happen in the moment, if it's meant to. Or prevent something from happening. I don't think dreams are meant to do that. So if you're worried about something that you saw in a dream, don't be. Chances are you can't do anything about it. If we or someone else are contracted to die at a certain point, nothing is going to change that, and nobody will be notifying you for any reason other than to prepare you for something. It's probably still not what you or anyone else might think it is. Certainly not who. Because that could change the course of things, which is not our place to do. One thing I can tell you, a lot of people talk to loved ones in that space. So that is something else that you can think about or do too as you're going to sleep. And that once we get used to trance, we can actually create a space to meet up with our guides. In fact, if you're doing meditation and trance right, you've already done that. You've created a happy and safe space. Once you've done that, you can meet your guides, your loved ones, or anyone you want to there. Or just go to be alone. Unwind. After everything that I have seen and experienced, there is no way that you could convince me that there isn't a direct connection linking our spirits to our bodies using our minds. This is just one example of that. Our mind palace, if you will. The information transmitted between those goes both ways. I know it does. Finally, the best way that I have learned to control the quality of my dreams or trance states is through music. So if there isn't anything in particular that you want to dream about tonight or meditate about or trance, I can't help but wonder what my profound connection is to sound and why it felt like I was doing something bigger than just performing in front of all of those people, but it works. It was almost as though the frequency and vibration that went up and out of the crystals conducting that energy was somehow healing or doing something else. Maybe that's what it's doing when you fall asleep to it. I don't know. But you can control the quality of your dreams simply by listening to music that's good for your soul. If you listen to angry music, you're going to be angry. Whatever it was, I do know that music and sound can change not only our mood, but our very being. And therefore can influence how our minds work. While awake or otherwise, I often use music to help me in my daily life, and I will choose the music based upon the music I want to be in, not the music that I am in. I control my mood at all times. So I highly recommend listening to some singing bowls, flutes, nature sounds, or whatever most effectively soothes you before drifting off to sleep tonight. Think about what you want to see in your dreams, and then immediately write down or text yourself what you saw when you wake up. Pay attention to the patterns before you jump to conclusions, and try not to worry too much about strange visions or things that could be easily misconstrued, especially those that you cannot change anyway. As always, thank you again for joining me today. It's been so much fun. And again, I assure you that we're going to be coming back to this topic again because there's so much more that I wanted to cover. We just don't have all that much time in each episode. So thank you again for joining me. Until next time, love to you all. Namaste.